Camera face on and everything.
Yeah, makeup, the whole
All right,
thing. All right.
7:30. Thought I saw makeup here.
Good evening. Tonight's meeting of the Committee of the Whole, May 16th, 2017, beginning at 7:30. And first thing on the agenda will be newly elected officials training part 1. Mr. McCall, that's the best intro I can give you.
Yeah, it's a darn good one it is.
The
city manager gave me a pretty extensive list of topics to talk about. So we're going to really start from the beginning and just deal with a lot of these things very generally, at least for tonight. To start off with, there's basically two types of municipalities in Illinois. There's non-home rule and home rule. Non-home rule municipalities derive their power from the legislature. If the legislature doesn't provide them with the power to do something, it doesn't exist. Non-home rules, which the city is, by virtue of a referendum, and home rule municipalities have much broader power. They have increased taxing and regulatory authority, but there are limitations. Obviously, they're limited by the Illinois and United States constitutions. They're also limited to legislating matters which are considered to be matters of statewide concern. And lastly, that power can be preempted if the legislature so states in any legislation which it passes. The city of Rolling Meadows is also a managerial form of government. The city manager is appointed by the city council, and the city manager is responsible for the day-to-day operations of the city, oversees the departments, the finances, the expenditures, and personnel decisions, with the exception of those made by the Board of Fire and Police Commissioners. The city manager also sets the agenda. The city has 4 labor unions, 2 of which are more recent additions to the city. And as with any employer, the city has ordinances in effect which protect employees from violence in the workplace, discrimination, sexual harassment, and other policies that any other employer would have. And also, the city manager appoints the city attorney, the city engineer, and also the deputy city clerk. As far as the mayor is the CEO of the city. He acts for and on behalf of the city in all formal occasions and receptions. He's also the local liquor commissioner. And if there's a complaint filed for alleging a liquor violation within the city, then the mayor, as the local liquor commissioner, receives that complaint. He reviews and hears evidence in connection with that. And he also has the ability to levy fines, to revoke, suspend a liquor license based on the evidence that he hears. Also, the mayor doesn't vote only in exceptional circumstances. One of those circumstances is where the authority of the city as a legislative body provides that any legislation needs to be approved by the corporate authorities. Then the mayor gets to vote, and that's typically a matter which requires, more commonly than not, a 2/3 majority of the council. He can also vote on resolutions that do not provide for the expenditure or appropriation of funds or incur any liability on behalf of the city. He can also vote if he just chooses to vote. Those are the only instances which the mayor can vote in the city. He does also have a veto power. The mayor can veto any ordinance or resolution. He can line item veto any expenditure or appropriation and approve the balance of those expenditures or appropriations. And if he does in fact exercise his rights to a veto, he needs to submit to the city council written objections to the ordinance or the resolution which he in turn chose to veto. And that resolution or ordinance then comes back before the city council at the next regularly scheduled meeting that can't be less than 5 days prior to the last meeting. It takes a 2/3 majority vote of the council to override that veto. He can also call a special meeting. And I should have said, I meant to start from the beginning. If you have any questions, just interrupt me as we go through it. As far as the aldermen are concerned, aldermen are the legislative and policy-setting body of the city. Each alderman must vote. You cannot vote present. Our ordinances provide you have to vote. An abstention is also a vote, and you can abstain where you have a conflict of interest. And there are different types of conflicts of interest. There are statutory conflicts of interest, and there are common law conflicts of interest. One of the statutory conflicts of interest would be if, in fact, say you have before you an ordinance or a resolution for the city to enter into a contract with a publicly traded company and you own stock in that company. Not a huge deal, but I suggest you call the city manager, advise the city manager, and it'll be dealt with appropriately. If you own 7.5% or more, if you own 7.5% or more in any company that provides goods or services to the city, that's conflict. Call the city manager, let the city manager know. It's important to note, too, that spouses don't create conflicts of interest. So if there's a resolution or an ordinance with AT&T and you don't, but your spouse has shares in AT&T, that's not a conflict. So, but in any event, I suggest the main thing to do is if you suspect there's something, or if it fits within the category of the items I've just discussed, just call the city manager. Any 3 aldermen can call a special meeting. And that meeting needs to be called. It can't be more than 48 hours prior to its being called. And the agenda needs to be put in place. The newspapers need to be notified. The agenda needs to be posted, put on the website, and so forth. And the same with the mayor. The other thing is, if an alderman wants something added to a committee of the whole agenda, the city policy is that the alderman who requests that be added needs to prepare the council action summary. And the deadline for submission of agenda items is noon on the Thursday preceding the date of the meeting. That allows the, yes, sir.
So if there's an issue that someone wants to bring, an alderman, whatever it may be, they bring it up in a normal council
Oh, I'm sorry.
They bring it up. And they bring it up in a normal council meeting. That doesn't necessarily mean it's going to get on the committee of the whole meeting. They've got to do like a write-up or something like that. Is that what you just said? Mm-hmm. Right? Okay.
Well,
versus just bringing it up in a council meeting?
I was also going to discuss a little later that as a staff request, if an alderman or alderpersons wish to have something brought on placed on the committee of the whole agenda, the staff would request that the consensus of 4 aldermen be had prior to it actually being put on the committee of the whole agenda. And the reason for that is just simply the city manager or the department heads spend time putting those materials together and doing the research and doing the studies that may be required and attended to that topic. But if only 1 or 2, for example, aldermen really want it on there, then, you know, it seems to me it should be up to the consensus of the council if they really want to hear it. That's just a staff request, so.
That's fine with me.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thank you. The Open Meetings Act. The Open Meetings Act basically presumes that all meetings are to be open to the public. The meetings require 48 hours notice prior to the meeting. The agenda needs to be posted. We've talked about that. But what's a meeting? Well, the Open Meetings Act defines a meeting as any gathering, whether in person or by video or audio conference, telephone call, electronic means, such as without limitation, electronic mail, electronic chat, and instant messaging, or other means of contemporaneous interactive communication of a majority of a quorum of the members of the public body for the purposes of discussing public business. For the purposes of the city of Rolling Meadows, a majority of a quorum is 3. So 3 members cannot, without a formal meeting and the notice and all the other formal provisions, cannot collectively discuss public business, absent and outside the requirements and the formal requirements of that meeting. A lot of times where those issues can come up are particularly with reference to emails. If, for example, one alderman emails another alderman and CCs the remaining council, if any one of those aldermen respond to that original email and hit reply to all, that's no different than all those people sitting in this room together without all the formalities of a meeting in discussing public business. So that would be a violation of the act. But, you know, it's not to say that 3 aldermen or 3 or more aldermen can't, or 3 more members of the council can't be together at any one given time. I mean, there's social gatherings and functions, and you just don't talk about city business. Closed sessions. Closed sessions require a motion, a second, and a roll call vote to go into. And the Open Meetings Act section, which provides for the council to go into a closed session, is listed on the agenda, and the mayor will indicate the basis for going into closed session. Once in closed session, the council is limited to discuss only the topic that they took to go into closed session to discuss. You got to be very defined and very careful not to go beyond what you went in there to discuss. One of the bases, there's a number of reasons you can go into a closed session. One could be land acquisition, litigation, collective bargaining, negotiations, personnel matters involving specific employee or group of employees, but no final action can be taken within a closed session meeting. The council needs to come back out into an open session and go through the formalities in an open session and vote during an open session on any action. No final action in a closed session. Once you're in closed session, you want to get out of a closed session. The process then is there's a motion to be made to adjourn the closed session. That's seconded, voted on. Then the doors are open. It's an open meeting. Then you go through the normal process of a motion, second to adjourn, vote on the motion to adjourn, and the meeting is concluded. Typically, the council coming out of closed session doesn't take any formal action, and the mayor will typically advise the members of the audience as to whether or not any formal action will be taken after the closed session. Illinois also has a Freedom of Information Act. The Freedom of Information Act has also a presumption that every public document should be disclosed to anyone requesting those documents. The city's required to fulfill that request and disclose those documents within 5 business days of the receipt of the request. The city can extend for an additional 5 business days, however. The city also is required, if it's requested to be done in electronic form, that the city put it in an electronic form, even if the city does not have it in an electronic form. You know, it was interesting to know, because I don't get, the deputy city clerk handles the Freedom of Information Act requests, and occasionally I'll get involved in one. But I think it was last October, and I got involved in one, and the deputy city clerk, what she does is she dockets them. So like this year, it'd be 17 FOIA 1, the next one's 2, and sequentially so forth. I think it was in October, and I happened to look at the docket, and it was 16 FOIA, like 483. So if you think the city doesn't get a lot of freedom of information requests, think again. I for one, was amazed at that number. I know some municipalities, they've got employees or employees, that's all they do all day long, 40 hours a week, 52 weeks a year, is respond to FOIAs. So I bring that up to let you know that that's the kind of activity that the city and the city clerk handles, but also it's important to note that if you send the city manager a communication, an email, a letter, or whatever, if that correspondence is within the scope of a Freedom of Information Act request, it's going to be produced. So, just so you know. The other thing is the Attorney General somewhat recently issued an opinion, because the Attorney General goes through complaints arising from denials of FOIAs and the like. But the Attorney General issued an opinion that provided, while the meeting's in open session, if a council member texts or emails another council member with their own personal device, their smartphone or whatever, that email is subject to being produced if required by the Freedom of Information Act, even though it's on your own personal devices. And that kind of leads us also into the Local Records Retention Act. The state has an act which requires municipalities and governmental bodies to retain records. And there's a process and a procedure and a policy that needs to be gone through in order for, in this case, the city to destroy any records. And so, like in the situation I've just described, if that document or that email or text is subject to a Freedom of Information Act request and you delete it, that's a violation of the Local Records Retention Act. Also, we've got, and it's coming up next month, the Prevailing Wage Act. The Prevailing Wage Act is a state statute which requires that all public improvement projects need to have contractors pay what the State Department of Labor determines to be the prevailing wage for that particular labor classification. Right? There's probably 60 or 80 of them. I don't know how many exactly there are. And so each June, for the most part, the Illinois Department of Labor publishes a list for all 102 counties within the state and indicates what the prevailing wage should be for that particular laborer for that following fiscal year. And in June of each month, each municipality has before it an ordinance to adopt the prevailing wage as set forth by the Illinois Department of Labor for that county, or here Cook County. And historically, what the city has done is the council has not adopted a prevailing wage ordinance, which the result of which is that the city, by default, falls back onto the Cook County Prevailing Wage Act ordinance, and the county always adopts prevailing wage ordinance. Alternatively, and some municipalities do, and not too many because it's just too expensive, the city or any municipality can undertake to commission its own report as to what the prevailing rates should be for each one of those labor positions. The cost of doing such a report, first of all, would be quite large, and secondly, I don't think it'd be much of a deviation from what the state comes out with anyways. But in any event, any contracts for public work improvements that the city enters into, you'll see that those contracts provide that the contractor, along with any other subcontractor, has to pay prevailing wages. The Gift Ban Act. The Gift Ban Act basically provides that an employee or an officer of the city cannot accept a gift from what's deemed to be a prohibited source. And prohibited sources are any person or entity who is seeking official action by a member of the council, does business or seeks to do business with the council, conducts activities which are regulated by one of the council members, or has an interest that's substantially affected by the performance or non-performance of those activities, or is a lobbyist, or also includes any agent or spouse or immediate family member who's living with a prohibited source. There are a number of exceptions, like everything else. If you pay fair market value, that's not a gift, obviously. Opportunities and benefits that are afforded to the public generally aren't considered a gift. That's an exception. Contributions made to an election campaign, not considered a gift banned by the Gift Ban Act. A gift from a relative, a friend, a sister, I mean, those things, those are obviously acceptable. And with respect to friends, if you got a long-term friendship relationship with somebody and you customarily exchange Christmas gifts, for example, that's an exception as well. One of the things that comes up more frequently is food or refreshments not exceeding $75 per person in value in any single calendar day. And the further requirements of that is the food or refreshments need to be consumed on the premises where they're prepared and purchased, or catered. And catered means food that's purchased ready for consumption or delivery. So you got a $75 per day limit on that. The other thing is, one of the more common exceptions is, or conditions is, you cannot receive from any one prohibited source during any calendar year a cumulative sum totaling more than $100 or $100 or more. So that if it's less than 100, you come within an exception. The other remaining exception I wanted to just briefly mention was the exception relative to intergovernmental and intergovernmental gifts. Employees and officers of the city can give gifts to other officers and employees of the city. There's no prohibition against that. The theory obviously being who's going to gain what from that. I mean, you're all in those positions already. So if, for example, a council member's son or daughter gets married and you invite the council, there's nothing that says that you can't provide a gift in excess of the $100, and you don't need to worry if you and your wife go or a council member and their spouse go, whether the food and refreshments are going to exceed $75 in value. So that's one of the reasons that that exemption is also in place. Also, the City Council has an ethics ordinance, which essentially, there's other parts to it, but for the most part means no employee or officer can engage in prohibited political activity. For employees of the city, it means you can't engage in political activities while you're actually working for the city. In other words, you're performing your daily functions with the city. Once you're done with work, you're free to do whatever you want politically. Officers of the city cannot require an employee to engage in political activity while they're actually performing their normal functions for the city. So you can't have an employee of the city who's out doing something for a political campaign while they're actually being paid during their customary hours with the city. The city also has an ethics commission. The ethics commission, the commissioners are appointed by the mayor with the advice and consent of the city council. There are 3 in number, and those commissioners cannot be related to any member of the city council. One other thing is they can also, if they get a complaint, then they can hear evidence and they can make a decision as to whether or not an ordinance has been violated. If they find that their ordinance has been violated, they can turn around and levy fines and so forth. One of the other things that comes up with the city once in a while is discussions with city vendors and consultants. Really, those conversations should all be had with the city manager. And not with council members. One other thing is staff-council interaction. We do have policy in place where if an alderman or alderperson wants to pick up the phone and call a department head, it takes less than an hour. It's okay if it's mentioned to the department head. Over an hour, then it's got to be directed to the city manager, and the city manager will either approve, deny, or refer to the city council to go forward. If the request is going to take more than 4 hours to research and prepare a response, the request must be approved by a motion of the city council. Department heads must advise the city manager in writing of all respects, and the city manager must report to the city council the results of all council member requests. That's the rules attendant to the discussions with the staff. And one other thing is it's come up a couple times before, but it's another staff thing. If in fact you go through the agenda and you have a question, it would be nice, and the staff would appreciate if you picked up the phone or sent them an email telling them what that question is. That gives whomever you ask the question the ability to actually research it further, to get into it, and when they're asked the question at a city council meeting, they can actually answer it instead of trying to shoot from the hip or saying, I don't know as I sit here, I'm going to have to get back to you on that. It just gives the staff a better opportunity to answer any questions that you may have and fully answer them during the course of the meeting. So that's all I have for tonight. Went much further than I thought, but that's all I have for tonight.
Jim, once again, it was another outstanding training session. Thank you. I will defer to Mr. Krumstock for the budget parameters.
Obviously, the next one that we have, Finance Director Melissa Gallagher and I are going to actually present this. We do this annually. So for the new alderman, this is nothing new. Obviously, we do it a little bit differently each year. The biggest thing that's in the packet is for you to think about, but also when Melissa starts the PowerPoint, it also goes through some of her thoughts and concepts. What I do want people to think about is, again, this is not a budget. This is just setting some of the parameters. It's also dealing with some of her thought process about property taxes and also bringing back some other services. And again, we're asking for feedback, because if the council says, no, we don't want this at all, that's part of what we're looking at. So where staff has already started with the budget process, this is, again, the first blush of some of the parameters that we're talking about for the 2018 budget. And with that, I will turn it over to Melissa to do the PowerPoint. And again, thank you for listening for the first part.
Thank you, Mr. Crumstock. Well, tonight we've got a PowerPoint presentation for you to kick off the budget parameter discussion. And we wanted just to kind of set the stage for you, a little bit of an overview. A lot of this our city council does know, but for new members and the public, it's nice to kind of go as a refresher. So we wanted to set some information out there. The city council, the city of Rolling Meadows operates, as city attorney just mentioned, under a city manager form of government, and operates under the budget officer method of municipal finance as outlined by state statute. The city's manager serves as the city's budget officer. We know this already, but it's good to mention again that our fiscal year is January 1st to December 31st. And as we start the process for the budget discussion, although we're in May, we do begin this as soon as the last budget's done. We start our planning process for the next year. So the city manager and the finance director work with departments throughout the fiscal year to develop and plan for next year's budget. But we also are looking outward as well, anywhere from 5 to 10 years. So while we might be looking at year one, we look out. In August, the proposed budget is delivered and distributed to the city council, and it is made available to the mayor, city council, as I mentioned. It's made available at City Hall, the Rolling Meadows Library. We have a printed copy at both those locations, and then we do post it on the city's website. Typically in September, the city council and the mayor meet with the city manager and the finance director, which we call one-on-one meetings, to kind of go in through that in-depth review of the budget. And then throughout the months of September and November, through November, there are public meetings or public hearings for the tax levy for both the city and the library. And then we have the hearing for the budget as well for the city and the library. The city council reviews, discusses, and makes changes to the budget during the city council and committee of the whole meetings. So typically in November, the city council approves the budget resolutions, the ordinances, and adopts the budget. And then the city attorney must file the budget resolutions and ordinances with Cook County by the last Tuesday in December, depending on how the holidays fall. One of our recent achievements is that the Government Finance Officers Association awarded the city with a Distinguished Budget Presentation Award for fiscal year 2016. We've also submitted for 2017. It is a nationally recognized program. There are guidelines for just the effective budget presentation, and this award does reflect the city's commitment to the highest principles of governmental budgeting. Credit rating agencies do look at this as an achievement. And as we footnote there, the city's current credit rating is Moody's at AA3 and Standard & Poor's at AA+. By way of background, the city does develop 2 key financial planning documents for the city's decision-making process. This is, of course, to allocate revenues and expenditures for our city. It's a very important process for the budget and for the 5-year capital improvements plan. As a reminder, the city's budget, the city's auditors and the city staff are completing the 2016 audit as we speak. And over the next month, and at the June 20th Committee of the Whole meeting, our auditors will be here to present the 2016 audited financial results. So this tonight really is our basic first blush look at the budget basic parameters for the 2018 budget with City Council, and we really appreciate any input from the City Council. I want to footnote here that the city does continue to monitor what's happening in Springfield for the state of Illinois' budget issues, any potential property tax freeze, unfunded mandates, any impacts from the local government distributive fund in terms of anything that might change there. We also are monitoring all our grants and any potential funding issues in terms of red light cameras and other items. Our budget parameters discussion really does focus mostly on the general fund, but we do touch on our other funds, 911, motor fuel, local road fund, debt service TIF, utilities, refuse, and our other funds. Put this slide up here just as a reminder. You, as city councils, probably have seen this before, but it's important when it does come from our budget book. It does show our budget planning calendar. We do put this out there just as a reminder what goes on at each council meeting and where we set the stage for the public hearings as well. This is an important slide. This does show our outstanding debt service for our general bonds. General bonds are our debt that is outstanding all the way to 2023. We list them all the way out there. We do not list the EPA loans, which do mature in 2033, but we do show this as a reminder of what's outstanding. 2017 marks that year where a lot of the debt service is matured and retiring. We have 2 debt service bonds that are still on our tax levy for 2017, but they do mature. One matures in 2017 for the tax levy year, and then in 2018. So why we put this on here is to show you that at the end of 2017, our estimated outstanding principal all the way to 2023 is $5.2 million. That means that at this point in time, one of those bonds will mature for the 2017 levy, which supports the 2018 budget, and we'll get into that in just a moment. And I would point out, too, the 2023 bond, as a reminder to our city council, that is the one that is supported by the general fund's revenues. This chart here, this is a common question that when folks come to the front counter or perhaps city council gets this question, you know, how much of $1 from every dollar is generated for Cook County? What comes back to the city? Well, right now, based on the 2014 tax levy, about 15 cents per dollar comes back to the city. The majority of that on the lower pie chart there, you can see that the majority of the property taxes go to the schools and public education. I would have to say, too, we do update this every year, so we do put in, as soon as the audit is done, we'll put that on the website as well, and we try to update that as soon as possible. Fund structure. Fund structure, so the city is made up of, we have 14 funds across the city. The general fund is our largest operating fund. It comprises 48% of what we do at the city. It comprises all our city functions, and that really is the hub, if you will, of the city. The budget does follow generally accepted accounting principles, which is GAAP and GAAP accounting. And what we try to do is show you the other funds that support the city as well. And those are outlined in the structure. Mostly governmental funds include the general fund, our motor fuel tax fund, our 911 fund, debt service, our local road fund, our 2 TIF funds, followed by enterprise funds, which are our full accrual accounting funds, which is utilities fund and refuse fund, and then our internal service funds. And when you think about internal service funds, you think about the sort of like the internal cost accounting for our city, and those are all supported by chargebacks from other funds, but primarily from the general fund. So for tonight's discussion, what we wanted to do was sort of go through these slides, and we can stop at any point, but what we thought we would go through the slides and come back, if you will, for city council discussion. And it all depends, of course, stop any time for any questions or comments. For city revenues, we start there. Revenues are evaluated at baseline data, meaning that we look at our audited financial data. We also look at our fund balance policies. What we have right now, we have a fund balance policy for our general fund. We have fund balance policy for our refuse fund and also 911. So those are some of the things that you look at. You're looking at also your fund balances, and we'll be looking at through our 2016 audited data. We do review data from the Illinois Municipal League. It's a very important piece. They also monitor a lot what's going on for the state of Illinois and always providing data to the city manager. And one of the things they have started to do is actually provide updates to their forecasts now more on a monthly basis. It used to be on an annual basis, so that's been very helpful. As I mentioned, we're going to be reviewing our audited fund balance to kind of set the stage of where we're going to be for 2018, but we do wait until that comes out. Just as last year, what was done, the city manager did review and reallocate based on the fund balance review, and that potentially might occur this year as well, with a reallocation of reserves and to be approved by city council, of course, with a resolution. So that's just something to note as well. One of the things that came out last year during the budget process was, could staff take a look at building permits and business licenses and make sure that we're in line with our area municipalities? And we wanted to bring that back as a discussion item. We did, just as a cursory review, along with community development, provide some data. In that look, we saw that we were sort of still in the median. What we wanted to find out, and we can come back as a discussion item, but does City Council desire that staff research this item a little bit further, bring back some data to a future COW meeting to see where you want to go with that and make some adjustments? Right now, business licenses bring in about $250,000 a year annually, and building permits, we can't always say. When a large project like Gallagher Insurance comes in, that's different. That's obviously going to increase our building permits, but we don't always know. Right now, the budget's somewhere around $400,000. That can fluctuate depending on what's going on in the city, and we don't always know. So something to think about. Utility rates. That's obviously one of the key areas for utilities fund. Right now, the Ad Hoc Capital Improvements Committee is reviewing the utilities fund. And we are looking at the Baxter and Woodman study. We're actually looking at potential update to that study too. But basically through that study, the proposal for rates for 2018 is a 7% increase, which is a blended rate increase for water, the portion of water in the utilities fund, then a 5% for sewer and a 5% increase for stormwater. Now that's obviously something that has been done in the past, and we're looking at that as a basic parameter, as a starting point. There are some factors such as, does the city desire to look at bonds as an alternative as well to a rate increase? All those factors are outlined in the Baxter and Woodman study that was produced a year or so ago, and the Ad Hoc Capital Improvement is looking at that. So at the August COW, what we were looking at as far as the capital improvements plan, we were looking at a proposal to take those rates that I talked about for 7% for water, 5% for sewer, and 5% for stormwater, and put that in the plan to look at that as a starting point for discussion. And we're looking for city council feedback on that as well. Moving on to the refuse fund. The last rate increase was several years ago. We're at about the same increase or same rate that we have been at for several years. The initial agreement was not to exceed a 3.25% increase year over year. There really has been a 0% increase over the last years. So given that the EAB work now is done, and as we've discussed with City Council, it is nearing completion. Not all the way finished, but it is in 2017. Perhaps it's time to look at, there has been some discussion from the community about a residential chipper service to bring that back. And if so, does the city council desire to look at a slight increase to the refuse rate? And we run some of those numbers initially to see what the city council, if you'd like to look at that. Something to think about. So for expenditures, when you flip over to expenditures, and we're looking at this as sort of a total pie presentation, a higher level view, we look at the baseline data. Obviously, the biggest portion of the city's expenditures are the salary and benefits. We are a service entity, and that's what we do as a municipality. So those are the pieces that we look at, and those are the pieces that we formulate in the beginning. Because of different ongoing labor negotiations, as done with the 2017 budget and 16, developing a manager's hold for a portion of that is something that the city is looking at. And maybe developing a manager's hold for special projects or capital projects, that is a very common element to municipal finance. A lot of cities do have reserves set by managers for future capital or other projects. As the City Council is committed to, is to fully fund the police and fire pension funds at 100%, with a shortened amortization period of 2033 versus 2040. I do want to note on this one is that the credit rating analysts at Moody's in particular was very pleased with that, spent a lot of time going through their analysis, and they felt that this was a very beneficial piece to what we were doing here at the city. Evaluating the capital plan is obviously a big portion of it. About $9 million of what we do here at the city is capital, and is ever-growing, and there have ever-growing needs, and develop a potential funding plan for the issuance of bonds. And then we look at determining the key road projects, and of course, the invaluable work from the Ad Hoc Capital Improvements Committee is helping with that. And we're looking at the continued repayment of the $100,000 from the general fund to the vehicle and equipment replacement fund to repay that loan back. And so the $800,000 is still owed on that. And then to continue the transfer of funds from the health insurance fund to the general fund to fund compensated absences. And note on that, there is, at the end of 2017, there will be about $1 million or more towards that effort. So again, we can go back slides for city council discussion. We could start, it depends on how you want to, look at this. And this is very first blush at things, so you can definitely, this is just for city council to begin the discussion. Why I mention that this one also is of a topic that we want to look at is the property tax proposal. And I would say this is not a proposal. This is only one look at a scenario. This is not the tax levy at all. This is more, if you do this, this is what it looks like, and we wanted to give some feedback to City Council. So based on the fact that, as we discussed, in next year's tax levy for 17, the 17 levy that funds the 2018 budget, $832,000 of that, the debt service will be retired, and we'll get into that in just a second. And so staff reallocated those line items, and we'll go into that. And again, this is just a first glance. However, there may be some thought process to look at, a slight increase to potentially hedge against any potential property tax freeze. I know municipalities are doing that, and it's just something to think about. So what are some general thoughts from City Council? We're going to table that for now, but we did want to just kind of, in this next slide, review sort of the higher glance at the tax levy, which is also in the City Council agenda if you can't read the tiny print on PowerPoint. I would say that I'm going to just kind of go through that left to right. That way you can kind of see the tax levy scenarios. So what we did was the first two columns. The first column shows what the property tax levy item is. So we've got police, fire protection, police and fire pension, IMRF pension, public works operations, the annual street program, 911, and then our debt service. The next two columns are the actual property tax levy for the last 2 years. So you can see those as detailed on that screen. The next column over then is the 2017 tax levy, and it's not a tax levy, it's just a scenario for discussion. What we did was that reallocation that we're talking about. So what we did in this slide here, and I'll go through that in just a moment, is show you just a basic look. So for police and fire protection, we did bring that slightly back up to levels of what it was in prior year tax levies. So $1.8 million for each police and fire protection. Just remembering that the police and fire budgets are around $9 to $10 million. So that's just funding a portion of their entire budget for the general fund. The next two, the police pension and the police pension and the fire pension, are the actuarial numbers that are developed through the actuary reports based on all of the funding assumptions that we've provided based on the City Council's guidance. And so those two numbers are the actual numbers from the reports. So $173,000 increase for police pension from year over year, and $151,000 year over increase for fire pension, still leaving at about a 50% funded ratio for both of those funds. IMRF pension, and that one is just a footnote here. We're saying it's decreasing by $25,000, but there is a caveat to that. We're still working on the audit. We won't know the final number till June. Public Works Operations is a slight increase there just to balance the reallocation. The next one down is the annual street program. So with that one, just as a proposal, if you increase it by $200,000, you can see that $750,000 would be the number that would be deposited into the annual street program from property taxes. 911 service, we left that as a year-over-year, $601,500. So this is just net neutral. There's no increase to the property tax level if you go ahead and look at that in that scenario. What we did, and the red arrows on this slide kind of show this, if we get a lot of questions about this, is if you decide to increase it by this dollar amount, what is the percentage, and vice versa. So let's say if you increase it by 2%, the increase in dollar-wise is $270,000, and then you can make the allocations that way. What we did was we thought this would be beneficial for City Council to take a look at and see, well, actually, we think it should be this way, we think it should be that way, but also to think about how we're going to move ahead further in terms of what we're looking at for Springfield. You know, we don't really know all the pieces yet, but at least this gives us a starting point. And I think that's the wrap-up. I wanted to kind of leave it there, but we can go back and we could start anywhere, and I'll defer to Mayor Prey now.
Thank you, Melissa. As we start off, let's open it up with, is there a general question from anyone about anything that Melissa has brought forth? Oh, yes. Alderman Cannon.
Thank you. Melissa, so the proposed pension payments you have for police and fire, would that just be in line with our normal contribution, or like we've done the last 2 years?
No, that's actually doing the 2033 number per the council direction, per the parameters that we have. So that, again, the $173,030 and the $151,941 keeps us on par with exactly what past councils have done, and also what Moody's and S&P have seen.
So if we do that, you're projecting we'll be closer to 50% finally?
We're actually around that 50%-ish,
Right.
More towards one pension than the other, but we are making those strides, getting healthier and better.
So you're not recommending we try to double it up this year?
At this moment,
At this moment,
no, because we're still working on the other pieces of the budget. And again, this is just first look at the parameter that we have for the item, because even what you see in the sheet is last year for this budget, the 2017 budget, we actually reduced the police and fire protection lines. We're trying to return that back to that other number. So in this flush that you're actually looking at, we're trying to use that $800,000 that's coming off of the property taxes, reallocating it into where we see it, where it's needed, and obviously $200,000 going into local roads and all those kind of pieces. But that's also why we have that other little box at the end that shows here's some other incremental that we actually would like to see. And again, you go back to the 2014 tax levies for the 2015 budget, that's when we actually pulled almost $500,000, $400,000+ from that line item, which was Public Works operation. And again, that's something that we would typically be talking about looking at. So again, this is just showing you with that $800,000, keeping that at the zero, and that's why that other box is actually in here. So that 173 and the 151,941 are good numbers. It's just how we do the reallocations with the idea when you see the budget, and again, that's why we have a parameter concerning about each of the additional steps, but also, as many people on the council know, and also what Northwest Municipal Conference has talked about, for the city of Rolling Meadows, if there's a state bill passed that could affect the city of Rolling Meadows, $1.3 million. But we are looking at all those things. That's also why you need reserves in a good place. But again, what you see right now, it's a long answer, but that keeps us on the 2033 without any additional dipping.
which I think is great, and I think most of us agree with that. I guess, the general tenor of what you're trying to do here, I think I'm completely in line with it. I think I really appreciate what you and Melissa have done to try to keep us very conservative, because I think none of us at this table know what's going to happen with the state. And I think we need to be really cautious going forward, not assuming anything there, because it sure is difficult to figure out where that's all heading. I guess one of the other questions I was going to ask you is, I know this is a preliminary document, but I just, in general, most of us on the old council, as opposed to the two new fellows that have joined us, were, hoping that next year we could do a couple $1 million again in road construction. So I guess just a general question I would ask, you don't need to get real specific, but do you think, do you see a scenario where that might be able to happen again?
There's always a scenario that we could do it, but then you're robbing from other points. And again, until we get into some of the local road money, and then when we look at some of the other reserves, and again, once we're done with the audit, that's when we will have the discussion about potentially, $500,000 split at 250. Do you put it for 2018 or do you do additional work this year? But that's some of the stuff that we're starting to work. But again, we know what Alderman Diastis has stated about additional money, and we know where we need to go, and that's some of the things. So your answer is yes, we're very conscious about keeping that at a level, but we are trying to work within our parameters. And part of that is also what can other funds, like we did this year, where the refuse contributed to the local road fund, and that is because our own refuse trucks are running on the streets, and we've had those discussions with the auditors. But again, in this preliminary, the answer is we're trying to work on that, but I can't give you 100% that.
Oh, no, I'm not expecting 100% anything tonight.
But we're very conscious of getting that number to a healthy number. And even if we were sitting here and we were saying, okay, the manager's proposed budget was going to have more money than that 200, that's something that is always in play. But that's why we want to show you what a zero is, reallocating, and then if you did 1%, 2%, 3%, 4%, what those other pieces are part of that too.
Okay, last question for right now. Obviously, we paid off a lot of bond money this year, or we're going to by the end of the year. Could you just refresh my mind about what that number was, just ballpark, how much we've actually paid off this year? What was our payments this year?
Okay, so there's multiple different funds that we actually have. So for the general fund,
But just the ones we've paid off. I know we had, I think, 4 matured
Yeah.
this year?
It's about $3 million.
yeah.
Okay.
Because in this year, we're actually paying off our Series 2005, 2007A, 2000A for refuse, 2007 local roads, and then the 2013, which was the redoing of our 2003. So that's why when people look at that list and that slide that shows some of our debt falling off, we really only have 2 that were on still in 2017 on property taxes. The others are being paid by revenues, specifically in utilities or refuse that they were attributed to.
Okay, so going forward, just as a thought with the bond things, we realistically could issue some bonds next year to cover multiple issues that we all are aware of.
That is correct.
Okay, thank you for answering.
Is anyone else? Alderman Hill.
Thank you. I'm intrigued a little bit by the hold options, the manager's hold. On the one hand, very good cash flow management, and it solves some problems long term. But at the same time, when you're discussing raising taxes or rates or what have you, it could be confusing to residents. So on the hold issue itself, can you just briefly tell me what, number one, how generally they are determined? You already do for capital improvements, right? And second, what restrictions, if any, are on the holds?
So typically, currently, if someone was looking at the 2017 budget, you would see a manager's hold in the general fund. And that is specifically attributed to current union negotiations with our 2 unions that are getting first contracts. And obviously, since 2015, they've been unionized, and we continue going on. So we evaluate numbers, estimates, everything else that goes into that manager's hold. And that's pretty much restricted, so we're not really tapping into that if we don't have to. The other manager's hold that you just heard about, special projects or anything else, a lot of municipalities set that up. So for instance, this is just for an instance, what we currently did with the business survey, that would be something that manager hold would be relatively small. It could be 50,000, it could be 25,000, but that's what it would be used for. Other things that come out after the budget is done that the city council has now decided, usually through a manager's recommendation, to complete. So another example would be when we were talking about street signs, or when we were talking about the streetlight program, which they did start. Some of those would be catch-alls instead of just going now back into the budget itself and say either A, you have to wait for the next year, B, we're going to use reserves. But again, those kind of holds are very restricted. So it's not something that I'm going out and buying furniture and other things without the council knowing about. But it's a small number. It's not, you take a percentage of the overall budget and you put it in there. It would also place any of those kind of restrictions. And that kind of hold, different from what we have, what we call the manager's hold for union negotiations, would be a very fine number that if it's not used because we don't come up with things that are not in the budget at the end, it's just that kind of hedge. Some managers would say, okay, I'm going to tap into the reserves. And that's why we're having the conversation over here. If the council just says, no, we just want one manager's hold and that's only for union negotiations, we get it. But we just didn't want to present something unless the council is feeling comfortable. And we're not talking a lot of money.
Okay, I might have a follow-up, but I'll do it at some other chance. I need to chew on that just a little bit. But secondly, I just want to thank you for the presentation. It's very understandable for me anyway. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Alderman Diaz, please.
Thank you. I think Melissa, you did a great job. And I'm coming out right now saying I need $1 million for the annual street program. 750 is not enough. I think we need to do that $1 million or better if we want to keep our streets and maintain them at the level or increase them. I'm just conveying my opinion right now.
And I would concur, and I would just like to signal out there that since there are bonds coming off the books, to take a look and see it's early enough what scenarios that staff can come up with, or maybe, because I don't remember the last time, maybe Alderman Diaz said when they floated bonds for streets 10, 12 years ago.
07, I think, 05 or 07.
Okay, but possibly look at that scenario again. So just put that out there, because I agree wholeheartedly we need to work on the infrastructure. Other questions?
The only other thing that I would need, just a quick idea from the city council would be, and again, staff was directed when, obviously during budgetary concerns and during some other things, we used to do 2 times a year the chipper service. And then during the budget and during some other periods of time, it went down to 1 and then it went to none. As you can see in this parameter, staff is asking, can we bring that back? It would be a very, very slight increase in the refuse. But that's one thing that I would need a straw idea before we even put that in there. We're potentially thinking about doing it once this year or next, or in the 2018 budget. But if the council says we'd like to do a spring and a fall, that's another reason why we're asking, can we bring back a chipper service? And that is one thing that people do here.
Yeah, it's Gallagher.
So
What is
The
that?
fireworks in the background are from Gallagher tonight, so.
Open the blinds.
Yes. Very amazing. Yeah, I would support that, because I have heard from a number of residents that over the years, folks that used to really take care of their property, or that the trees, bushes, the only time they ever really go after it now is if there's a storm. So
Wow.
I never had a roar of cannon when I spoke before. So I guess what you're looking for, Mr. Comstock, is for you to come back to us, or direction from staff to come back about what would the cost be.
Well, that's the thing, because we haven't done it in a period of time, and roughly when we looked at it, it ranged between, and again, if you do it 1 time or 2 times, it ranged between that $40,000 to $60,000, depending on what staff we were using and everything else. So again, if the council feels comfortable with that parameter being put back in, that we can look at it when we do the 2018 budget, we would have more information about that. We would talk about if it was once or twice, and then that slight increase. But today, we're just looking for a straw vote, if you feel comfortable bringing it back for us to work on.
And then are you also looking, is it a possibility to do it in 2017, or are you looking at more toward 2018?
It's really moving towards 2018
Okay.
because it's really not budgeted in 2017.
All right, thank you. Alderman Diastis.
Did we not take money out of the garbage fund this year and do something else with it?
We actually put it into local roads.
So was there an excess in that fund this year?
We were within parameters of the refuse fund balance. That's why we were allowed to do that, and that's why staff recommended doing it.
Okay, and what would be the estimate if we didn't raise the refuse charges for next year? Would we still be within parameters? And could we do one chipper service at that point?
We have not run the numbers yet because we still have to do that. And again, that's why we're having this discussion, because until we get to that point in time with the budget, if the staff is comfortable and we're going to do that, but if we see that, again, a flat line on refuse could be affected and we could do 1 or 2 pickups, we would be telling you that. But if we need a slight increase to keep us within parameters, within allowing a contribution from the local roads from refuse to local roads, we want to make sure that that's maintained too. So the answer is we're going to evaluate that depending on what kind of discussion.
Then my answer is I'd like to hear the evaluation before I make a decision.
Okay.
So, yes, Alderman Jenkins.
I agree. I want to, excuse me, hear the evaluation of it and stuff, but I am in strong support of this. I have had a large amount of residents the last few years reach out to me going, what the heck? We really want this back, even if it's just once a year. And I think it's something that the residents feel very strongly about. So yes, of course, we want to evaluate it, see the costs, and keep the costs down as best we can of it, but do whatever we can to get this back for the residents. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Crumstock, what would be the, I have a question. I'll go through. I have a question to get back to you. What would the turnaround be to get that information to staff? I mean, for staff to get that information to the council?
Our plan, obviously, because we haven't done that section of the budget yet, and typically, as we, from the schedule by August, we're presenting the budget. The feeling would be by July that we would have that, because at that point in time, we would have a cow to show you where we're sitting with the refuse fund at that point in time.
Okay.
So plan would be hopefully to bring back for the July cow, show you what refuse has the potential to look like for the 2018 budget for you to evaluate before you see the budget.
Okay, thank you. Alderman Cannon? Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. In the past, I have used the chipper service myself a couple times, but that said, the city's survived quite well for the last 5 years without the chipper service. I'd much rather see that money go towards the street program. I think people have gotten used to getting private contractors, and Public Works can correct me if I'm wrong, but if I remember the last time they did an audit on actual houses that used it, I recall the number being less than 15% of the population. So we're asking 85% of the people to support 15%. I could be wrong in the number, but it's about that. And I just don't think that that's fair for the 85% of the people who don't vote for it. I guess the other thing that I would throw in here, I had an interesting conversation with a young man who recently moved to my ward, and he's an auditor. And he called me up. I never met the man before, and he said, "Can you explain to me why our garbage is so expensive?" And I said, "What do you mean?" I knew exactly what he meant. But he does audits. And he said, I did an audit the other day, and I just don't understand. Every city that I audited is paying less than $20 a month. And why are we paying $30? So, I mean, I wouldn't even consider having an increase. That's just off the books, in my opinion. I mean, we're the highest garbage. There's only one other municipality in this part of the state that I'm aware of that has a garbage price anywhere near us, and I believe that's Barrington. I don't think anybody else is even close to us. Buffalo Grove just redid theirs, and they had an increase, and they're still less than $17 a month. So, I mean, I can't see us offering another service, taking money away from potential streets, which I think is more important. People have gotten by without the chipper service for the last 5 years. They've made do. For the people who use it, it's a great service, but it's a very, very small minority. And I just don't think that the majority should pay for a very select service. So that's just my opinion. Thank you.
Thank you. Any more comments? So you would like show of hands to go forward, to put it,
And then, as we said, July, we would bring it back if the straw vote says for, I could call it like the mini budget before the 2018 budget, but it would only be on refuse.
okay. So we have a show of hands of bringing it back in the July meeting. Yes, go ahead, I'm sorry.
Is this for an evaluation, or is this for to put it in?
This is for the evaluation to come back.
Right.
Okay.
So can we have a show of hands to bring it back as an evaluation for the July meeting?
July cow.
For the July cow. One. What do we got? How many? 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, the majority has it, so please bring it in for the July meeting. Anything, Mr. Crumstock? We're now on to building permit process for residential and commercial.
First thing, when the PowerPoint's actually being changed out, actually just want to acknowledge one person sitting behind me. Elizabeth Payne in Community Development actually stepped up and actually did this PowerPoint. So if I butchered, I apologize. But again, the other thing that I just want to mention for people at home, obviously what we're going over is the current residential and commercial building permit process. Obviously, why do you need a permit? Well, as we all know, there are all different kinds of things that happen and things that need to be looked at. So it's kind of funny too, because people don't always think about what could happen. And that's what we're here to do. You have a department that is well-trained and well-versed on different things. And, you know, it's one of those kind of things. Architects and builders can build anything, but what do they go to? So, again, they're here, community development specifically, and public works, to actually make sure that you're really in a good, safe environment. Obviously, with this picture, you can look at furnaces installed without a permit could cause a fire. You can also talk about improper spacing between sprinklers or any kind of issues. Let's say that someone's creating an environment and then you get a kid stuck. That's some of the stuff that community development and the inspectors are looking at to make sure that the code books are based on decades of best practices, and also making sure that there's enforcement. So construction companies and contractors are actually making sure that the occupants who are living in that house are actually safe and secure. They give you and the occupant the best chance to avoid a fire, structural failure, or something as simple as getting someone caught in a bad situation. But that's the first reason why you really need a permit. The second one is it keeps the contractor honest. You know, you can look at what's good work, what's bad work. And obviously, you can also look where water pipes can be left or not capped, and then you have another issue down the line. So again, do you have a good contractor? We always hope that you have a good contractor here. But what happens if a contractor cuts a corner? What happens if a contractor is not watching all the building permits, or, you know, they're not working from the building permits that are actually provided? Community development is there to make sure about the checks, making sure that what's on the plan that has been approved by code, by review, is actually being conducted. Most construction works up hidden behind walls. They're just trying to make sure that the work that's behind the walls that you do not see, that you might not also notice, is actually being done. So it's another check and balance that you actually see with each of the permit process. So the other third reason that you actually see is it helps to protect your property value and to make selling your property easier. I know that we're all hoping to be in that house for a long period of time, and that's another reason why you want to make sure that stuff is completed, done correctly, safely, and securely. Your home or business, and again, that's also for business companies, is your biggest investment. It's also sometimes what people actually see in front of you And that's that first impression that people have. So that permit goes a long way for that investment in your property. It's making sure that you're complying to codes. And those codes are adopted as of, each time that we do it. So a person building a house in 1970 is completely different from 2017. But as each code changes, they're making it safer, more secure, and making sure that things are done properly. The other thing that you might want to decide and think about is when you get ready to sell your home, modifications without a permit might create a problem and might also end up that a person has to tear down the addition or leave it unoccupied due to costly repairs once they start doing some of the work. So it goes back to number 4. Saving money many times. Yes, I do hear sometimes I had to go pay for a permit. But again, your payment of the permit is going to save you money down the line. Insurance companies may not honor your policies or properties where work was done without a permit. Insurance companies may not cover damage caused by work done without a permit. Insurance costs may be reduced in the result of a municipal adopted building code and rigorous enforcement. So not just wishy-washy enforcement, but rigorous. And enforcing them usually helps by trained and certified code enforcement personnel. And as everybody knows, we have obviously inspectors in-house, and we actually use an outsourced service for certain items too. Reason number 5, work you do may adversely affect adjacent properties. I know many aldermen have heard, hey, I have additional flooding since someone did the work. That's why the permit is needed, because you have to make sure that the resident next door or the building next door is actually done correctly. Insulation of, some people might say, landscaping or fencing, has the potential to increase flooding in a different area. That's another reason why when you come in for a fence permit, they're looking at the site plan, they're making sure all the areas are able to flow correctly. Improper sump pumps that are put in could discharge onto your neighbor, can discharge into a different area. And again, improper, you might mean well for your property, but you're affecting your neighbors. Reason number 6, it's the law. Yeah, I know that you hear that all the time. There are different government levels that continue going into building requirements and examples. People come in and say, hey, why do I have to come in for a permit if I'm working on windows? Well, the reason is because there's a law that says municipalities must make sure that the 2015 Energy Conservation Code is actually being adhered to. So those windows that you're putting in have to be looked at. They have to make sure that they comply with those codes. So again, a permit is needed because we're, as a municipality, dictated that we have to follow it. And also the other thing, many times permits that we're doing, we're reviewing obviously ADA requirements. Even here when we did our parking lot, there's an ADA issues that we were addressing. And again, permits and inspection ensure the business and the homeowner are complying with all federal and state. So that brings us to, for people at home or sitting over here, what is the current building permit process? Well, obviously for a resident or business, identify a contractor. As if anybody was walking up to the counter, talking to Elizabeth or anybody over there, the first comments would see, check with the Better Business Bureau so you're not having a fly-by-night or someone else who doesn't understand why building permits are needed or why you need to follow codes. But check with the city, see if the contractor is licensed and bonded. It's another way of doing that. And check other work contractors have done. It's basic things that people should think about, but again, you might have the best person in mind, but again, taking a few more minutes doing these checks help on overall. It's also best to obtain 3 estimates and sign the Illinois Attorney General Consumer Rights Form. We actually have that form here at City Hall, and we do recommend that people actually do sign off on that and know your rights, because there are rights from the state of Illinois for any work that's actually done by a contractor. The other part is obviously submit a completed permit application with all the necessary information. I know many of you heard from me in the past that people submit a permit, it's not completed. What we always tell people is sometimes people have the best intentions to just start a permit process and say, okay, when I get everything done, you'll get that later. Well, we need the full permit so we can evaluate the mechanical. We can make sure that everything is safe and secure. But again, when you have a submitted permit with all the checks and all the licenses and all the bonds, you get your turnaround pretty quickly. It's just when you get these little things that are missing, and again, it gets back to now the contractor is told they need some additional point, then they have something else. So again, you go back into, if you have everything in there, it helps getting all the pieces together. Number 4 in the list is applications and plans are entered into the community development system. So we track when it was coming in, when it was responded to, when each review was done. So we keep that. But reviews generally take 5 to 10 business days. So hypothetically, as we always talk about, let's say that someone submitted a permit. It's not completed. Well, that's 5 days sitting over there. Then you told the contractor that they need to resubmit because it's not a full thing. That could take 1 to 2 weeks for them to submit. Once everything's back in, it could be that 5 to 10 days. So sometimes those delays are not the city. It's, again, full, complete, and you've heard me say that. But it also depends on the complexity of the job, because some of our submittals, when you have fire sprinklers and some structural, it goes out to other people. And those contractors obviously are consultants that we use in Burke Engineering for certain items too. It takes them 5 to 10 days, but we do turn things around as quickly and as we can. Obviously, the next part that we talk about, if the plans are not approved, written plan reviews identified point-by-point deficiency. And you can see a letter is actually sent to those individuals that talk about which code is missing, which code needs to be complied with. So it's a full letter system that goes to the contractor. Other deficiencies are addressed and the permit will be issued. And again, number 7, obviously, this is what a permit would look like. We do ask people to put them in the front window. If you come here at City Hall, we have 2 of them for the projects that are currently going on here at City Hall. That does need to be shown from the front window so people know that you have a permit. So obviously, we also make sure that the plans are actually there on site. So when inspections are done, it's important that that's actually there so people know everything in there. But again, call community development for the appropriate inspections. They go over typically what you need. The request for the inspection is a minimum of 24 hours in advance. We do schedule them in half-hour blocks for each of the inspections. So if you have multiple inspections, it might be longer than that half an hour. Upon completion of the project, the final inspection and all refundable bonds are completed to the individuals. Obviously, there are just some permit process examples that we have here. So again, a typical fence permit, submit required documents, building permit application, information to be included in the application deals with the material of the fence, height of the fence, length of the fence, depth of the post and holes, anchor methods for the post. Obviously, a copy of the contract, if applicable, if someone's using an outside service to do it, if they're not doing it themselves. The consumer right acknowledgement form, again, just protecting the resident. 2 copies of the plat of survey showing where that's going to make sure that the setbacks are actually approved and appropriate. And then 2 inspections are required. So the post-hole depth inspection and obviously the final inspection for that. The next one, another one that's currently used, I'm not picking on anybody, but I know that this alderman has already gone through the process. A detached garage permit. Submit required documents, building permit application if there's electrical that's going to be in there. So the electrical permit application needs to be signed by a licensed contractor. The contractor list who's actually doing the building, the electrical, and any additional work. Copy of the contract, consumer right, again, acknowledgement protecting the homeowner, 3 copies of the plans of the garage, 2 copies of the plat of survey, again, showing where it's going so everything can be made sure that we're within the setbacks. And then 3 inspections and typically 5 to 10 days for that if we have everything for the plan review and all the submittals. But 3 inspections are actually typically used for a detached garage. The framing rough, electrical rough, and then the final to make sure that everything is done. Other inspections may be required depending on the approved plans. So if you're doing a new foundation, driveway base, if you're doing electrical underground work. So there is a potential that that could be a little bit longer and it needs some other items. Obviously, the newest one that many people go through is the new single-family home permit. And again, when you go through this, again, it gets a little bit longer because there's more in there. So you have the building permit, electrical, mechanical, plumbing, all the safeguards for the resident. And then obviously, typically for this, now you're engaging public works, engineering, plumbing, and outside consultants to make sure that you're actually in a safe, secure manner at that point. So again, for the single family, now you're on to more inspections that are going to be required because you want to make sure the footings, foundation, underground plumbing, all these pieces to make sure that that house is going to be a safe, secure for the new resident that's actually in there. Other inspections may be required, but again, each one of these are explained and gone over. You know, just a real case scenario, just to go over that on one restaurant, a local restaurant, they actually came before the zoning board on 9/22/2015. They received by the city council the zoning relief on December 8th, 2015. There were 10 permits issued for this, including interior remodeling, interior demolition, fire protection, exterior site work, and signs. There were plan reviews done, 4 performed for the interior remodeling, 3 for fire sprinkling, 1 for interior demolition. So when I say 4 that were performed, that means when it was submitted, there were still some issues that needed to be addressed. So that was reapplied for each time. So there were 16 plan reviews performed for this restaurant to open up because, again, what you submitted and what you actually do. There were a total of 42 building inspections performed, 30 were approved, 12 were not approved. There were 5 fire permit inspections, 3 approved, 2 not approved. And again, that's the outside consultant who comes out for that. There were 4 health inspections performed, 2 that were approved, and 1 was on a temporary with conditions, and then 2 that were not approved. And again, at one point, because the city's health inspector was actually out, we actually utilized the services of the Palatine health inspector to do one of those. And then obviously, day 422 for this restaurant, on 11/17/2016, they did receive their final certificate of completion. So again, that's just another process. Again, part of that was also another of those issues, get a good contractor and they will get everything else. What I also remind people is permit process. These are just local examples of signs where you really need a permit. And open wires, open electrical boxes, a violation notice typically from an inspector if they notified or they will be given to the individual. There's also sometimes letters that are actually said, please complete within 30 days. And again, it's mostly for safety that we're looking at these kind of pieces. And then obviously what we're trying to say is community development's here, ask questions. Obviously with some other items, as we always say, it's better to be safe than sorry. And that's the biggest thing that Public Works and community development is always looking for overall. So that's in a nutshell. Just wanted to bring, we haven't done this in some time, but we just wanted to go over building permit process in residential and commercial.
Thank you. That was very enlightening, Mr. Crumstock. One thing that I am formally requesting at this point, and I think I've requested it before, is that many times a contractor submits a permit, and the city responds back to a contractor. And that contractor doesn't always go back to the resident and say, we didn't have all the plans, or we didn't do this, or we didn't do that. I am formally requesting that our department respond not only to the contractor, but to the principal, be that a resident or whomever, that the permit was approved or it wasn't approved, and why. I'm tired of having residents contacting me saying, it's been 2 weeks, it's been 3 weeks, it's been a month, and we haven't heard back. When in fact, the city has responded to the contractor, but the contractor hasn't responded back to the resident. So I'm formally requesting that we add that.
Yes, Alderman Cannon.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm in the process of building a small project at my house, and I just wanted to say that the department has been very helpful to me personally. They realize I'm an idiot, so anyhow. That said, I guess the question I would ask, and I don't expect an answer right now, is, one of the things that I hear on an ongoing basis, just as a general statement, that Rolling Meadows is a very difficult town to do business with, especially relative to building something new or doing an addition. I don't know whether that is factually true, but it's a comment we get almost endlessly. So I guess one of the things that I guess I'd be interested in finding out as time goes on, not today, not tomorrow, is how do we stack up versus our neighbors? Is all the things we just talked about there what other people expect? Do other towns expect less or more than we do? Is this just a standard that everybody follows? I have no problem with anything that was spoken about there. But again, I think, I won't speak for anybody else at the table, but I can tell you on myself, on an ongoing basis, it's the number one complaint I get all the time. And to go along with what Mr. Diasta said, I actually had a contractor approach me just a couple weeks ago with that same exact problem. There was just lack of communication because only one person was being contacted, and he actually got cut out of a couple things versus the homeowner. We're the ones that we, or your departments, get thrown under the bus because you guys are still doing your job, but somehow it's not getting communicated to all the departments who are there. He was told by a person on our staff that he had made a recommendation we change our form, and he was told specifically that we couldn't afford to change our form, quote unquote. Thank you.
Do we have any other comments? Yes.
Thank you.
Jarvis.
Thank you, Mayor Prina. I agree with Alderman Diastis about implementing something like that where we can follow up with, because I think a lot of times too, yes, we'll get the residents say we're difficult to work with, but it's not always the city, no one's perfect, but some of these contractors want to cut corners too. And so that's why, like you're saying, Alderman Diastis, that the residents need to know that, hey, yes, the contractor applied for this permit, but we shot it back to him and said, listen, you didn't complete this, or you didn't supply the survey, or you didn't, whatever the case may be. They don't always truthfully go back to the homeowner and say, oh, well, I didn't fill it out right. They're not being honest. So I think that will help with a lot of the residents that might think that we're difficult to work with. I also had work done in my home 5 years ago prior to being on council, and not one problem because we followed the proper procedures. So I think that would be a great idea, and I would strongly support that. Thank you.
Thank you, Alderman Matakis. Anyone else? Questions, comments?
Closed session.
Okay, then we have a request to go into closed session. We have 3 items. First one is Ask Me under Statute 5 Illinois CS 120-2 of the Open Meetings Act. We also have another one for 5 ILCS 120-2C2 under the Illinois Open Meetings Act. And the third one is discuss personnel under the 5 ILCS-120-2. So there's a request to go into closed session for the above-mentioned topics. This does require a formal motion and vote. Is there a motion to go into closed session?
So moved.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. Is there any discussion? Seeing none. Clerk, please call the roll.
Cannon?
Here.
Hill?
Here.
Majikis?
Yes, here. Yes.
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 Sorry.
Not here, yes.
Yes, here.
Yes. That's okay, you just followed.
Can't do president.
You followed.
It's yes or no?
Yes, to go into closed, yes.
Manager?
Yes.
Diastis?
No, yes, here.
Vivas?
Maybe.
Yes, here.
With 7 in favor and 0 opposed, the council will move into...
I said no.
Should we do it again, Jenny?
With 6 in favor and 1 opposed, the council will go into closed session. The press and the audience are advised that the council will not anticipate taking any action about returning to the open session.